Welcome to the Free Speech Nation podcast with me, Andrew Doyle. I'm delighted to be joined by my guest, Graham Linehan, who's one of the most successful sitcom writers of all time. He's, of course, the creator and writer-director of the award-winning sitcom The It Crowd and the co-creator of Black Books and Father Ted. He's also written for Brass Eye and Count Arthur Strong and The Fast Show. Of late, he's become embroiled in the debate surrounding gender identity, ideology and trans issues, which has transpired to be quite toxic, shall we say. He's been banned from Twitter, for instance, even had a visit from the police. So now he's writing a Substack website, which he updates daily, called the Glinner Update. So it's well worth checking that out. Graham, thank you so much for joining me.
No worries, thank you for asking me.
Obviously, as I said, this is a very toxic debate, and I think a lot of people don't understand very much about it, and I think in particular, they don't understand your involvement and what has happened to you.
Yeah.
So I think before we get into all the ins and outs of it, it might be quite useful to go back a while, because the first time we interacted, actually, we had a bit of a spat on Twitter, didn't we?
Yeah, well, I was a holy warrior for the left at a time when I kind of felt that the left were, you know, they were right on everything, and not just right, but morally right. And I thought that they came from a place of being anti-homophobia, anti-sexism, all these things. And then this happened, and all those kind of all those certainties that I had were completely crumbled.
Yes.
You know?
Well, this was about the time of Gamergate, and I think a lot of people don't really know what that is. It might be worth giving us a bit of a background.
I don't think anyone really has a full understanding of Gamergate because it was so many different things, and it looked different in a kind of Rashomon way from whatever angle you looked at it.
Yeah.
But there was a very, very large part of Gamergate that was about trying to drive women offline.
Yes.
And there was also a large part of it that was to do with impersonating women.
Yeah.
Impersonating women and pretending that your opinions are those of a woman.
Yes.
And that was used to undermine people, and it was all smoke and mirrors. There was lots of weird stuff going on. And I remember seeing women being piled on and thinking, you know, and I just never liked it. I never liked bullying, you know, especially of women. Debbie Hayton, a friend of mine, says these are the worst kind of bullies. The bullies even the other bullies hated. The bullies who bully girls.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And it just got my back up, you know. And one thing that I liked, I think there was something called Operation Lollipop, where all these right wing guys pretended to be black women.
Yeah.
And they tweeted out a thing, "End Father's Day," right?
Yeah.
So it was like a satire of woke. Stuff like Titania.
Yes.
But it was kind of weaponized, and people were joining in with it, people were falling for it and so on. And I thought this was terrible, you know. But then the left started doing it.
Right, okay.
But the left, after Gamergate, like when I thought, oh, that was brilliant, we saw them off.
Yeah.
But I just noticed that it was happening again, but the left were doing it.
So I think it's a lot of people, because, you know, only 20% of the country are on Twitter. So they see all these kind of things as going on the fringes of the internet and all of these debates. But actually what's happened now is that a lot of these debates are breaking out into the mainstream, and we're all kind of facing them whether we like it or not these days.
Well, I noticed that you have unisex toilets here at GBNews.
We do.
That's probably you know, this trickle down advice that everybody thinks is incredibly diverse and so on. But you know, if a woman if a woman's being interviewed who's been sexually assaulted and can't be near men, that unisex toilet is a problem for her. You know, and it's that type of thing that is kind of trickled into institutions all over the UK. I mean, you know, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds early on, but that's essentially because Stonewall has been giving institutions all over the UK misleading advice as to the nature of the law.
Now, we will definitely get on to Stonewall and to all of this. I think a lot of people don't really understand what is meant by gender identity ideology. And I think what people think when they think of trans people, they think of what we used to call transsexuals, as in someone who is so uncomfortable in their body that they feel they have to present in a different way or have surgery to change themselves, which is obviously not an easy path to take. It's painful, it's expensive, it's, you know, and
not to be taken lightly.
And this is gender dysphoria. But I think when it comes to gender identity ideology, this is something different, isn't it?
One of the big problems at the moment, and one of the reasons I think that the initial reaction to me speaking about this was so intense, is because I think a lot of people think that what's being discussed are transsexuals. And of course, the truth is that, and also, sorry, to go back to Stonewall, the protected characteristics are sex and gender reassignment, right? Gender reassignment very specifically protects transsexuals. But Stonewall have been telling everyone in the country, including the police, the NHS, the IPSO, the Press Standards Organisation, that the protected characteristic is actually gender identity.
Yeah.
Not gender reassignment, gender identity.
Yes.
In other words, that protects everyone who just says, completely, self-declaration, who just says, I'm, if they're a woman, I'm a man.
Yes.
That person, in Stonewall's eyes, is now a man and must be treated as such.
And the idea of gender identity, which I've mentioned before because I interviewed Helen Joyce about this, she puts it as a kind of sexed soul, the idea that we all have an innate gender identity which has nothing to do with our bodies. Now, this isn't quite the same as gender dysphoria, is it? It's not.
No, gender dysphoria is an intense, hatred of your sex body.
Yeah.
In extreme cases, therapists will recommend to people to do something about it. But having said that, it's still not. I think even a lot of people who have been through the process. I know, for instance, a lot of trans men who are forming together to talk about this because they're very worried about the young women who are suddenly identifying as trans and having these procedures. But it often doesn't alleviate distress.
Yeah.
In fact, suicidal ideation has been found to increase sometimes. So it's a very, very serious thing that cannot be taken lightly.
Yes.
And yet, in America, I believe there's crowdfunding going on for double mastectomies for 30,000 young women.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, this has escalated very, very quickly.
It's hard to find the exact numbers, but there's if you do a search for double mastectomy or top surgery, you'll get those kinds of figures.
So, because so few people have been able to have the discussion about this, because whenever the discussion is raised, people are accused of being transphobic or hateful or this kind of thing, and women in particular who are concerned about their space, as you mentioned, the unisex toilet, that kind of thing, that women are concerned about that, are immediately dismissed as what they say is TERFs, trans-exclusionary radical feminists.
Yes.
Which is a slur now.
It's a slur, and it's important to remember one very important reason why it's a slur and why it can only be understood as a slur. Because women do not, these radical feminists, they do not exclude trans men from their feminism. They include trans men in their feminism because they say, you are women, your struggles are important to us, we want to help you.
Yes.
So they're not trans exclusionary, they're male exclusionary. And that's very different. And that, more than anything else, is what gets these activists so angry. It's the anger of boys who are not allowed in the treehouse, in the girls' treehouse.
And this is what got you in trouble on Twitter originally, isn't it? Because you said, can we stop calling women TERFs? Was that right?
Yeah.
And what happened when was this?
Well, that was my first crime, That was, God, when was that? That was about 4 years ago now.
Right.
And I had a spot of cancer that was very easily taken care of. And I saw that. I think what really pushed me over the edge was I had campaigned for abortion rights in Ireland.
Yes.
And then when Irish women won that particular fight, Amnesty Ireland, who I had campaigned with, released a tweet saying a huge victory for pregnant people. And that's the moment where I just started to see red, because I thought my wife isn't a pregnant person, she's a woman, And I started to notice this kind of dehumanizing language slipping in everywhere. I saw the comedian Carrie Lloyd called women bleeders in one tweet, and cervix havers started slipping into
menstruators, isn't it?
Menstruators and cervix havers, all these dehumanizing terms, and then at the same time, you've got this weird argument they have where they say you're reducing people to their genitals and their body functions, when that's exactly what they're doing to women.
Yeah.
Calling a woman a menstruator, can you imagine anything more dehumanizing? But it's seen as the height of inclusion.
Yes.
To do, and to me, it just shows that women are so little thought of,
Yeah.
it doesn't even register as a problem to them. Like, they don't do it to men. They don't call men prostate havers.
No, and they don't. Whereas sometimes you see women with an X instead of the E.
Yeah.
You don't see men with an X instead of the
Never.
E. And
Never.
it's interesting.
Andrew, I genuinely mean this. It's a war on women. It is a war on women, and it's being done in a kind of underhanded, evasive, dishonest way. You know,
Yeah.
You'll notice. I mean, we were talking about this. You'll notice that, our ideological opponents, they will never talk to us. They will. I've been smeared by the Guardian over and over again, by the Independent and the Metro. They could interview me the way you are, but they never do, because they know that my positions are completely reasonable.
Yes. I think a lot of people will be interested to know, though, how you, who are, a comedy writer, well-known figure, gets involved with something which is so far removed from your craft and what you do for a living. And so can you just talk through how that happened?
Well, as I say, in the early days, just saying stop bullying these women was enough to get me called a bigot.
Yes.
So once one person calls you a bigot, then, I'm not going to take that from people. I'm not going to accept that. So it became not just a kind of thing about defending these women. It also became, defending my career, defending my good name.
And yourself, I mean, it's interesting, that when I check on Wikipedia, it calls you an anti-transgender campaigner. Do you want to respond to that? What do you think of that?
Well, I long ago stopped looking at Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is edited by the same types of people who, like, I'll give you an example. Maya Forstadter, whose decision recently was absolutely shaking.
Yes.
When it was upheld that her beliefs were protected.
And this is the woman, the tax expert who lost her job because she, claimed that
biology was important to her job. She was in a think tank.
Yes.
And biology is important for her to state the truth.
And she was called a transphobe.
She was called a transphobe for this.
And then didn't the judge initially say that your view is not acceptable in a democratic society?
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to what I'm talking about. I mean, one thing that people may not realise, a phrase that we're all familiar with in this fight, but that people might not be familiar with outside of it, is institutional capture,
Yes.
And you'll see it in things like the NHS saying that sex is assigned at birth.
Yes.
When, of course, it's not assigned, it's observed and recorded.
You'd thought the NHS would know that.
You would think the NHS would know that. But all these places are kind of, it's a mixture of credulousness and, a fear of going against it. There's all sorts of things in play.
So when someone smears you like that calls you anti-transgender. Now, I mean, firstly,
well, if I could just finish the thing I was going to say about Maya, but Maya and plenty of other people on the gender critical side who are big names, none of them have verified ticks on Twitter.
Right.
And the LGB Alliance that was set up to protect lesbian and gay and bisexual people alone, with no one else. They had a blue tick for about an afternoon.
Okay.
And then Twitter just took it away again.
Right, okay, so they almost got verified. Basically.
Yeah, so that's what you're up against. You're up against Wikipedia, Twitter. Reddit is actually under the control of friends of Amy Challoner, who used to be with Stonewall.
What you're saying here is that, I mean, when you talk about institutional capture, is effectively big tech and all the major companies, all the public forums where these debates should be going on are controlled by people who have a particular view, and not only that, are willing to silence those who have a different point of view, which almost generates the illusion that this is a settled matter.
Exactly, that's it exactly.
Right. And so when Wikipedia have this information about you that's wrong, I mean, well, let's put the question to you: are you anti-trans?
No, I mean, one of the aspects of this fight that I'm in, which is one of the most ironic, is I now know more trans people than any of the people calling me transphobic, with the exception of people in Stonewall.
Yes, yeah.
All they want is for the debate to be less toxic and for people to stop pretending that sex isn't real.
Now, it's interesting you say that because, there is this, we mentioned the institutional capture, and as well as taking control of the narrative around this, it also suggests that all trans people feel the same way about this. And actually, there's a lot of division and discussion within the trans community about these issues. And what you're asking for, didn't you write to Stonewall to ask for the toxicity to be lessened so that we can have the discussion? What happened when you did that?
3 or 4 years ago, we wrote a letter to Stonewall Johnny Best, who's part of an organisation called Queer Up North. He's a long-time political gay activist. He wrote the letter, and it was very reasonable. It basically just said, "This is a very toxic conversation.
Yes.
Can we help bring down the toxicity? Can we stop calling women names who want to talk about it, and so on?" And within the day, Stonewall said no.
I just find that incredible. I mean, I saw there was another open letter that people like James Dreyfus and Alison Moyer had signed, asking for a discussion.
That was it.
Was it the same letter? And
Alison Moyer had to take her name off it because she got such abuse.
Because they've been attacked now as a result. I mean, the idea that asking for an open discussion, polite, civil discussion is somehow, that makes you beyond the pale. I don't understand that.
James Dreyfus played the Master in audio version of Doctor Who, and recently they released a kind of every person who'd played the Master. I don't know what it was, a video or something like that. Yeah. His was the only name they left off it.
So it is a kind of like, let's just erase and pretend that anyone with a contrary viewpoint doesn't exist in this debate.
They did it to J.K. Rowling on her birthday. The Guardian removed her name from the birthday honours list.
Yes, the most prominent novelist in the country.
And they replaced her with a guy who's something to do with the NRA, a Trump supporter who's to do with the NRA.
So you see, this is the politics of infantilism. This is, you know, when I think back to the comparison between, say, the gay rights movement, the difference was the gay rights movement, there were protests and all the rest of it, but no one said, we're going to lock you up if you use the language we don't want you to use, or we're going to attack you if you don't agree with us. You know, it was never that strategy, and that's why people were eventually persuaded, and that's why the majority of the country support gay rights and marriage now.
Absolutely, and gay people never tried to get into spaces where they weren't supposed to be in.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the idea that female spaces are now wide open to men is it's absolutely outrageous.
So one of the
I can't understand why people aren't. If I was a woman, I'd be rioting in the streets.
Well, some of the counter arguments I hear are, well, there isn't an epidemic of men identifying as women in order to get into toilets to sexually assault women, but that's not how safeguarding works. It's just the minority that you have to worry about. It isn't. No one's saying this is how trans people behave. And
and they will always try and move that. They will always try and reframe it so that it sounds like you're attacking trans women.
Yes.
I'll give you a very good example. 2 women were fired from lost their groups who ran the girl guiding.
Yes.
They had girl guiding troops, I think they're called. And they both lost their jobs because they found out that under Stonewall's advice, and this is the advice that's currently in play, right? Girl guiding has incredibly stringent rules for men taking care of troops or being with troops or you know, on away trips or anything like that. Those rules are very, very tight, okay? As soon as a man declares himself a woman, those rules aren't just relaxed, they disappear.
But how can that be? I mean, I am baffled by this. It's, you know, when I applied to be a teacher, that I was checked. There was a disclosure and barring service check. I didn't take that as a personal insult and say that someone was calling me a sexual predator. I didn't, you know. It's a minority.
It's not that trans women are more dangerous. It's that if you create a sacred, untouchable caste, then predators will identify into that caste in order to get access to young children. When you think it like if and now they want to bring in self-declaration, where the bar is even lower. So if you think of what the Catholic Church, the abusers in the Catholic Church had to do to get close to children.
Yes.
You know, they had to make it their life to understand the scripture, to serve mass,
yes,
to take on the work of a priest. And they did it. They did it to get close to children.
And it doesn't take many to cause an awful lot of damage. That's the thing.
You know, the final image of the Spotlight film, which is about the Boston Catholic scandal, is, you know, as soon as a couple of people come out, the phones just start ringing off the hook.
Yes.
With, you know, because for every abusive man, there's going to be how many children had their lives ruined by Jimmy Savile?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And now we're getting into a position where Jimmy Savile does not have to do anything except identify as a woman to get closer to his victims.
So why is it you think? Well, firstly, why is it we can't have that conversation? Because it seems like a sensible conversation to me that we need to have. But also, why are so many people just not only reluctant to have the conversation, but to demonise people like you who do.
There's a few different things going on.
Okay.
Like there's people like let's take a good example. Owen Jones, right? Owen Jones is someone who has pushed all his chips in on what is essentially a bluff. You know, he claims to believe that if a woman says they're a man, then that is a potential sexual partner for Owen Jones, right?
That's someone in his dating pool now as a
Yes.
gay man, right?
Yes, as a gay man. So he's essentially come out as straight. He's come out of the closet again as straight, right? But he will never actually say this out loud because he knows that it's nonsense. You know?
Well, no, that's an interesting point that I think needs some clarification. Stonewall redefined homosexual on their website and in their materials, so it no longer means same-sex attracted, it means same
gender
attracted. And of course, gay men are not attracted to how people identify, they're attracted to male bodies, and similarly lesbians are attracted to female bodies. So it's actually, firstly, it's wrong on the face of it to redefine it in that way. But what it also does is exactly what you say. It now opens up this idea that gay men are somehow transphobic if they will not date people with vaginas.
Yeah.
And that accusation, I looked into this because there's been a lot of discussion about this idea of genital preferences being transphobic. I didn't realise the extent of it, and someone sent me a link to thousands and thousands of screenshots of activists saying exactly that, saying old homophobic tropes, effectively saying you don't know, you haven't found the right woman yet, or saying to lesbians you need a penis to sort you out, basically.
Yeah.
So we are seeing the old homophobic tropes rehabilitated with a progressive sheen. Isn't that what's going on?
Exactly. It's the most homophobic movement I've ever seen. It beats Gamergate. It beats Game. I've never saw the kind of ferocity directed at gay men and women under this. Like the cotton ceiling it was where the boxer ceiling came from.
Can you explain those terms?
Sure. The cotton ceiling refers to the quote unquote problem of lesbians not wanting to sleep with fully intact men who claim that they're women.
Yes.
Right? That's seen as a problem. The cotton is the cotton of their panties that these men can't get past.
Okay.
Look, I'm a lifelong lefty. We've gotten into fights online, and here I am on GBNews talking about it, you know, because the left refuse to talk about it. You know, partly out of fear, but also because they're helping spread the idea that all of this stuff is just natural, anyone who disagrees is a bigot, and so on. One of the things that I think will help armor people when they get into this fight is to remember that what they're trying to do with LGBTQ plus, etc., is they're trying to make this more complicated than it is. They're trying to make it seem like sex is complicated, there's more than two sexes, all this sort of stuff. All you have to do to defeat them is stick to what you know. There are only two sexes. You know, intersex people are often brought up as a kind of a gotcha, but intersex people are either male or female.
And actually, a lot of intersex people really resent being
they hate it. Yes,
in this way.
Again, I know loads of intersex people who are extremely offended by this. You know, but the thing to remember is, I think one thing that happened at Stonewall, and I think it's played out in a lot of organisations, is that the trans side, being basically white cross-dressing men, took over the organisation and rebuilt it in their own image. So when you see LGBTQ plus T and everything,
whole acronym, wherever it goes.
All you have to remember is everything after LGB means straight. You know, everything after LGB just means straight. If you're after LGB, you can call yourself queer, you can call yourself trans, but usually what it means is some straight guy wants to march at Pride.
People don't believe that, but recently Andrew Cuomo's daughter came out as queer. And when pushed to describe what she meant by that, she said, I'm demisexual, which means that I can only be in a relationship with a man if there's a romantic element. Now that is actually just old-fashioned heterosexual then. You're basically like a Victorian heterosexual.
Well, you know, it's you know, that's amusing. That type of stuff is amusing. But what really gets me angry is when, like, the CBeebies had an interview with a couple, and it's a straight couple. But the man identifies as a woman, and so they called it a pair of lesbians. So to an audience of toddlers, they're saying this lesbian couple, and they see a man and a woman. It's so pernicious and homophobic, it drives me insane.
And the extent to which everyone has bought into it is quite amazing. I saw an article today about the Mosque Bomber. who
So funny.
is now identifying as
a woman, yeah.
And I read the article in The Independent, and it just says, and she's now saying this, and look at her, and it's
He's got a full beard.
massive beard,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm, again, like I will always, like if someone transitions or whatever, I will use the pronouns they want to use, whatever. But we're talking about a horrible piece of work who bombed a mosque. Why are we?
All the things that gender critical women have been warning about for years.
Yeah.
Like, predators will identify as trans, criminals will identify as trans. All of these things are turning out to be true.
I mean, it makes sense that if you're going to prison, you would identify as female. It's a lot safer for you.
Exactly. But like I hear that female prisoners are now carrying knives, which they never used to do. They're handing out condoms in California prisons, women's prisons. What I found most extraordinary about this whole thing is that after the appalling things that happened in Rotherham, Savile, the Catholic Church, people still somehow think that everyone is just lovely and there'll be no problems if you destroy safeguarding. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That no one will take advantage of all this. If you look at like that guy, he's the Wales first non-binary non-binary mayor, right? Yeah. He's a white guy. He's just a white guy, and he's in a position of power. Is there anything more standard than that?
But, in a liberal society, I mean, I do believe that anyone should be able to call themselves what they want, dress however they want, do all the rest of it. But I think it's this thing of pushing other people to automatically accept those designations.
It's very dangerous as well. There's a famous sign that I've posted many times on my site, which is it's a sign that was placed in a toilet, and it says something like, if you see someone in here who doesn't look like they belong, don't stare at them, don't make a fuss, and it was a list of all the things you shouldn't do, right? Now, if you're a young girl in a public toilet and a man comes in behind you and you saw that sign, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
They've taken away one of the few things that women have to defend themselves, which is the ability to make a fuss.
Yeah.
Now women know that if they do make a fuss, they might be the ones who get into trouble.
So I think we saw that quite explicitly with the video that went viral a couple of months ago. Was it at a spa in Washington?
Spa. And there's been, and there's another, that's a very interesting thing. They have gone nuts trying to discount that as a hoax. The Guardian even published a story that basically said it was a hoax.
And what happened in that video?
Just a guy who said he was trans, and he's just naked in front of all these kids and so on.
And the video showed a black woman, going to the desk complaining because her daughter was in the room, and she's called a bigot, and she's called a fascist, and we even saw,
and it's the law in California. He is. These places are now unisex.
But I was astonished by the reaction from the supposedly left-wing commentariat in the UK, because I saw Laurie Penny saying, well, maybe the problem is that your daughter shouldn't be staring at people's genitals.
And there's another thing. Why is it always they spit? I saw that tweet by Laurie Penny. Why does it not occur to them that a man might actually be looking at the women?
Yeah.
It's just like they've all gone mad.
And just to emphasise this point, it's a very small minority of people who will exploit the gender self-ID, but they are dangerous.
Yeah, there's.
I think that people will say you're just smearing all trans people as being predatory.
No, but the unfortunate thing is, like we would always get that thing thrown at us. But the thing is that some of the people who are predatory are major figures in the trans movement, like Jessica Yaniv. Yes. Also known as Jonathan Yaniv. Megan Murphy, a top Canadian feminist, is no longer on Twitter because she said that's him about him.
Yes.
And this was when he was using his male name. So these are abusive people who are trying to control the narrative around themselves. And they're like I've been targeted by a con man who sued me twice now.
Yeah.
Now he bit off more than he can chew. We've backed him into a corner now.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a case. But like I always knew that because of the way that this was being treated, it was a kind of a charter for con men, fetishists and misogynists,
Yes.
Like if you look at Twitter now, you'll see a million anime avatars, right? No photograph, no photographs attached to the account.
Yeah, I've noticed this a lot now.
And they're called and they have she/her in the bio.
Yeah,
and they're just sending dogs abuse to every woman who speaks up. These are men. These are just men who've put she/her in their bio.
I mean, again, when it came to the J.K. Rowling thing and someone collected the screenshots of all the abuse I was shocked by the extent of the. I mean, they were threats. They were rape threats. I mean, it was.
She got a pipe bomb threat the other day.
I mean, it's misogyny though on a level I honestly haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And I think it's clear. And again, it might be a minority, but there's a lot of them within the minority, and they're very vocal and they're very threatening. What do you think this does to the perception of trans people in society?
Oh, well, one of the things we're worried about, and one of the reasons why, we'll often have trans people on the show is sorry, I do a weekly podcast thing myself, and we often interview trans people, is simply because, they're terrified of the backlash. Yeah. And what's worse is I think gay, what's worse, but what's just as bad is that I think gay people have as much to fear, because all of these people are being lumped in with gay people. When more of these stories start coming through, people are going to look to people like Owen Jones and say, well, you were sticking up, and he's the face of, gay political activism. And they're going to say, well, you were cheerleading this all along the way. And a lot of gay people are going to be tarred with the same brush,
Yeah.
That's why the LGBT Alliance is really important as well, just to try and kind of remove it out of the alphabet soup.
I mean, it's worth talking about them a little bit because, of course, when Stonewall originated, it was LGB, and it was about, because, of course, the idea of sexual orientation as something we need to stand up for and protect is actually unrelated to gender identity. I mean, you could have a trans body lobbying group who's protecting their rights, but actually it's not automatically or intrinsically connected to the idea of being gay or lesbian or bisexual.
It's got nothing to do with it.
I've been surprised by how many people I know who, when I mention the LGBT Alliance, will say, "Oh, that's a hate group, isn't it?"
Yeah.
As in they've just, because some prominent people like Owen Jones have said it's a hate group, that narrative has somehow been embedded. People tried to get their charity status.
Oh, you can see the same type of thing come up again and again. There's bad people on both sides, you hear a lot. LGBT Alliance are a hate group. You're trying to debate our right to existence. There's a lot of these phrases that you'll hear, and you hear them from various different people. They're never backed up by any evidence.
I've never seen any evidence of hateful comments from the LGBT Alliance.
Bev and Kate of the LGBT Alliance are two kind of elderly lesbians, who've been fighting for gay rights their whole lives.
Yes.
Simon Fanshawe supports them, who established Stonewall. Miranda Yardley did a speech at their inauguration, or whatever you would call it. Miranda Yardley is a trans person.
But I think in a way this is why it is quite important, wherever possible, and I know it's hard, but to keep the moral high ground and not to go into the sort of explosive rhetoric. And I think sometimes you have gone into that. And I think, because then they can point at that and say,
Yeah. But then again, I mean, there's been misinformation about that as well. Like the thing, Pink News ran a story saying that I compared trans rights activists to Nazis. Never did that,
Well, that's made its way onto Wikipedia, I'm sorry to tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that type of thing. It's like what they'll do with this interview, for instance, is if this gets any kind of interest, they'll find a phrase or something that they can use to kind of paint me a certain way. And, you just have to, one thing I realized was, because there were so many pervasive lies about me, I just had to keep saying the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And sometimes what I say may sound explosive, but it isn't really.
Yeah.
Like, when I make fun of Sam Smith is a pop star.
He's a millionaire.
He's a millionaire pop star. We're allowed to make fun of pop stars being silly, which is what Sam Smith is being. So, we can't accept the rules that are being handed down to us because they will stop us from being alive.
Yes, I totally get it with Sam Smith as well. I mean, the idea that he's in some way a victim, it is punching up when a comedian mocks someone. I mean, one of the things that
he's another white guy. He's just a white guy.
Well, do you remember when he said that he had an inner woman inside of him, and he showed a video clip to show this, and it was basically him dancing provocatively and pouting. Exactly. So he's basically saying that's what women do, is it? I mean, there does seem to be a kind of weird.
There's a lot of blokes, and one of the things I did was. I went onto the dating site Her, which was supposedly a lesbian dating site. And I joined up and I called myself a lesbian and they accepted me. They let me in, And I did that because this was being done for real by lots of men. And often the men, they don't even go to the bother of putting on lipstick. They just tilt their heads.
Yeah, they tilt their heads provocatively.
Yeah, they do that.
Because all women are very coquettish.
Exactly. and that was reported as me making fun of trans people, as of me mocking them. I'm not the thing I'm trying to do is showing that these people are appropriating not just women's experience, but trans people's experience. These guys don't have dysphoria. They don't have, some of them aren't even cross-dressers.
So what do we do when the argument is reduced to two narratives, one of which is basically a fantasy? I've had arguments with people about J.K. Rowling online, and I always say, please can you quote the transphobic thing she has said? And they never can.
No.
And instead of sitting back and thinking, okay, well, maybe I'm wrong. If I can't find any evidence, maybe I'm wrong about this, because that's what I do.
Yes.
And that's what an adult does, right? Surely.
Yeah.
So what do you do when even the prominent commentators are buying into the fantasy, completely doubling down on it? And I mean, is it the case, as you say, with Owen Jones? Maybe they've invested too much to admit they were wrong. Is that maybe it?
There's a phrase in economics, the sunk costs fallacy.
I've heard this. Yeah.
And that's what it is basically. And there's some people who are more a victim of it than others. Like Owen Jones, I think is sunk. Yeah. Because when this all kind of shows itself to be what it is,
yes.
And part of what it is a huge medical scandal. Like, when these kids are detransitioning, it's going to be, I mean, that's the most upsetting and urgent part of it for me, is what's happening to these kids. Because puberty blockers are not a pause, they're not reversible, despite what people like that have been saying for years. But I'm hoping that it will end the career of people like that, people who have been so wrong on such a high stakes question, and so blasé. And so disgraceful about calling people bigots who are trying to talk about it.
And when it comes to children, maybe it is worth exploring this a little bit, because when it comes to children who are saying they have gender dysphoria, and of course there's an element of social contagion within this as well. If you look at the rate of the Tavistock clinic, the trans youth clinic, how much they have escalated in terms of the number of referrals there. And as Helen Joyce pointed out to me, that the vast majority of these kids who say they feel unsure about their gender, that it is resolved by puberty in the vast majority of cases. But that's not going to happen if you have medical intervention before
exactly
puberty.
Exactly. There's this idea that, and then they'll spin it, they'll say, oh, you're saying there's something wrong about being trans. And it's like, no. It's just that if you can avoid spending your life having to go to doctors to fix the problems that have come about because of because you've taken so much testosterone, you see detransitioners in despair on Twitter because they've had hysterectomies in their 20s because of the complications that come with testosterone. It's the idea that we can't talk about this stuff. How dare they?
That's what Keira Bell was saying in her case, is that someone should have given her better advice as a teenager when she said that, was it the Tavistock she was working with? She said that they were just almost urging her along this path that actually to slow down, have the conversation a little bit more.
Yeah.
She could have been saved.
Yeah. And I saw another young woman who said that, she now looks like a man. She's got like she'll have to shave for the rest of her life. Her jawline is different. Her voice is much deeper. And she said one of the things that I've lost is that companionship with other women, because they see me and they see me as a man. And I've lost that. There's going to be so many stories like that, because this is being sold as a panacea,
Yes, yeah.
And there's certain people, probably the most vulnerable people, probably the people who need the most protecting, who are most in danger, including autistic people. Yeah. Autistic people are heavily overrepresented in this group. It's because they see a easy solution to their unhappiness,
Which is often brought about by puberty, of course.
Exactly. The best cure for dysphoria during puberty is to go through puberty, puberty. Most of these feelings resolve by the end of going through puberty. And the other thing is, some very important brain development is going on through puberty. And these blockers are arresting that brain development. You often see these kids who've had, blockers and stuff like this, and they're wearing like the most childlike clothes, I saw one trans-identified woman, and she looks like an aging man. She's in her 30s, She's poisoned herself with testosterone. Male pattern baldness, And she's wearing like a kind of romper suit.
Right.
With a badge that says slut on it. These people are so confused.
What do you say, though, to people who would say, well, look, the rates of attempted suicide amongst trans teens are very high, and that actually to
None of those studies stand up.
Really?
No. None of those studies stand up. The studies, one of those studies spoke to, I think, a class of about 30 kids.
Right.
You know what I mean? Also, who hasn't thought of suicide? It's one of the things of going through being a teenager.
I think a lot of parents, because they're told this, they're basically said, unless you go along with this, and don't question it in any way, your child will kill themselves. That is the worst thing to say to a parent.
Weaponizing of suicide is the most. There's many unconscionable things about this, but that is probably one of the worst things about it.
Yes.
These people want to get what they like. Another thing you'll often see, right, is the people who are selling this most, who are selling the idea of puberty blockers and early intervention most, are fully intact males, right?
Yeah.
So their transness exists only in terms of what they put on in the morning.
Yes.
How they dress. And yet they are saying to young kids, you need to get on puberty blockers immediately. It's outrageous. There should be arrests.
Would you ever sit down with these people and have the conversation?
We've tried. I mean, as I say, we wrote that letter to Stonewall. Mm-hmm. Something happened that I can't really talk about. But that was a kind of a meeting that went nowhere.
Well, it just occurred to me because of what happened at the weekend in Edinburgh, and this is a good example of this. So, a group of women who are gender critical, women who are concerned about the gender recognition proposals in Parliament, and they've gone along and they're recognised at the pub. And the bar manager and the staff say that they feel unsafe with them being in the room. They don't harass anyone. They don't cause any problem. They're not doing anything by all accounts, even by the accounts of the bar manager, by the way. So, and yet the police are called.
Yeah.
And then you have Lorna Slater, the co-leader of the Scottish Greens, saying these women were harassing and abusing the staff. And so you have people in power just buying into this fantasy, promoting it, pushing it out there.
Yeah.
How can you possibly resolve this if people are just going to effectively witch hunt like this?
I'm not sure. I mean, it may sound weird, but like there's so many ridiculous aspects to this, like a group of women being accused of making people feel unsafe because they're in a pub.
Yes.
That I can't really write anything about it
in
terms of a fictional or comedy sense until it's all over, because it's so mad that you just can't beat it.
I mean, maybe the hope is that more and more people will speak out or raise concerns.
Yes.
And I think every now and then there's like a tipping point. Something happens where people are thinking, oh, hang on a minute. I mean, one of the things for me was when I heard that at the Tavistock clinic there was an in-joke among staff where they would say to each other, there won't be any gay kids left. I've seen lots of testimonies of trans people who say that the reason they knew is because, maybe as a girl they liked football, or as a boy they like dresses. And there's a new children's book out which is about a girl
who has short hair,
who thinks she's a boy because she likes short hair.
Yeah.
These are just, and that's a book aimed at kids. So what they're saying to kids is those old 1950s stereotypes about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, they're real.
True.
They're real. And then there was Helen Joyce pointed out to me that there was the leaked video of the training session at Mermaids, which had the sex spectrum illustrated from Barbie to G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think, though, that the tide might be turning insofar as Stonewall, for instance? A lot of people are coming out, a lot of government departments are moving away from Stonewall. We've had universities distance themselves from Stonewall and accept that they were giving misleading advice about the Equality Act.
Yes.
For instance, although I know the backlash has been vociferous. I mean, if you take Cardiff University, because some members of staff raised concerns about the university's association with Stonewall, students protested and they produced a leaflet with the photographs of all of these staff members and even a little illustration of someone with a gun. I find a lot of this stuff, a lot of the rhetoric and imagery of the protesters tends to be around violence, the phrase punch a turf, kill a turf, this kind of thing. And it very, very, well, dare I say, a hyper-masculine kind of behaviour.
It's a very male form of activism.
Yeah.
It's a violent, coercive, aggressive. There's nothing female about it. I don't want to resort to stereotypes myself, but
I know some pretty aggressive women.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'll tell you what, testosterone makes all the difference, and this is a very testosterone-filled
But do you think, though, given that more and more people are identifying the problems with Stonewall, including some of their founders?
Simon Callow today.
Simon Callow today, exactly.
Yeah.
Might it be the case that with more and more voices, people will just say you were a Cassandra? People, you were there before and people just weren't listening, maybe?
I hope so. I mean, I've been waiting 3 years now for my friends to say, hang on a second, I know Graham Linehan, he's not a bigot, he might be onto something here. Yes. And no one really has. So I've been kind of twisting in the wind for 3 years, and they targeted my family. They went after my wife's TV show. They released our address online. All these things, and no one from my old comedy pals or no one came along and actually a couple of people.
Yeah.
Privately,
that's the way
it's always done. Privately, yeah. But some people, they really, like James Dreyfus, he really put everything on the line and he's suffering terribly for it. And again, people are just letting him go through it.
Maybe that's why you don't have more support, is that people see what happens.
Sure.
When they support. And I understand that, actually.
I do. That's why you can't kind of ask people to be brave. You can't say, will you come and will you do this? The closest we got was when we got a few people to sign the letter supporting J.K. Rowling. It wasn't even supporting J.K. Rowling, it was condemning the death threats and rape threats against her.
Which you would think everyone would be on board with.
Yeah, even with that, there were people who were telling me they couldn't sign it,
Right.
And they always had a great excuse.
And do you feel that you've lost a lot of friends over this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know which friends I have and which friends I don't anymore, because you can't take the psychological risk of phoning someone you haven't seen in a while and having them call you a bigot down the line, And it's often because these people, they simply do not understand the issue,
Yes.
So what can you do? I can't. You're calling someone asking them to be in a TV show or something. You can't get into a long debate where you're trying to tell them about puberty blockers and about the abuse that women are receiving online, because all they have is, I was mocking trans people.
There's something very appealing about a simple narrative, because it means you don't have to really do much thinking. And when I see someone say, Graham Linehan is an anti-trans person, Graham Linehan is a bigot, well, that's easy to digest and understand, and then I can move on.
That's what's happening with a lot of institutions like the police. Like the police went through the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and they were called institutionally racist. Yeah. And that really had a bad effect on them. So what they've done with gay people is they've just thought, well, Stonewall know what they're talking about. We'll just outsource all our opinions on this matter to Stonewall. And Stonewall have been telling them a load of nonsense. A load of really... And so I've had a police round, one phone call and one visit, because of two blokes who know each other.
Could you just tell us a bit what happened there? Because I read about the police visiting you, and this was because of something you'd said online, isn't it?
One of the police actually visited because, and if you have a clip of it, you really should show it. Of Adrian, I shared a video of a trans activist named Adrian Harrop being. You'd have to say trounced by Posey Parker on Sky News, right? So I shared this video and I said something like, here's Dr. Do Much Harm speaking to Posey Parker and having his ass kicked, or something like that. Mm-hmm. The next day, the police came around.
On what grounds?
That was it.
And it
was harassment. Harassment to share this publicly available video. But the thing was, Harrop knew this guy called Stephanie Hayden, who is I better be careful here because he'll sue again. But Harrop knew someone called Stephanie Hayden, and Stephanie Hayden is the one who called the police on me and sued me in the same weekend.
And what did the police say to you?
Well, they're looking for an easy life. You know?
Well, exactly.
When they phoned me, they were saying, "Do you know Stephanie Hayden?" And I thought, "Oh, brilliant! They're gonna arrest Stephanie Hayden."
But it was you they were after.
And it was me they were after.
Because I remember the silly spats we had online were around the issue of free speech, actually, and what it was okay to joke about, really. Yeah. Not to get into all of that, but I think once you've had an experience like that, I suppose you must see that free speech is...
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of schadenfreude about what happened to be...
Not on my part,
No, don't worry. but from the right generally, and I totally get that. My only excuse is that I was kind of possibly as, as swayed by these online people who were actually lying a lot of the time and exaggerating and making me more afraid of right-wing movements and so on. You know, it looks now that Trump was just like a kind of a America having a belch rather than a real, threat. So, there were all sorts of things like this that were exaggerated. But one thing that I realize now wasn't exaggerated, and it was one of the problems I used to have with your stuff, Andrew, was with Titania and stuff, was because I just thought, well, this is low-hanging fruit and it's not true.
Right. Yeah, no, I had that a lot from people.
Yeah. But
I get
as you point out, as you pointed out in your thread, nearly every single one of your jokes has come true in one form or another.
Yeah.
And so it's actually true that these crazy conspiracy theories I heard were actually kind of, the ones that would always come. It's political correctness gone too far. But like the truth is that we're getting these every day. The tiger who came to tea is the latest example of it.
Yeah, but that's always been the criticism of what I do, is that I'm the equivalent of someone saying, oh, it's just PC gone mad. And actually, I was a big supporter of PC and the idea of being polite in society and all the rest. I see this as a very different thing to PC. And I think people are...
It's authoritarian. It's control.
Exactly.
It's trying to control speech. It's trying to control thought.
I don't see how anyone could call themselves a liberal and not have a problem with that.
Well, it kind of snuck up on us all, like especially if you're in it. Because when I was in it, I really thought, oh, I'm fighting a good fight and all that sort of stuff. But now with a bit of distance, I realised that I was being manipulated by people as well. Like, for instance, during Gamergate, I remember there were people going after someone called Super Gamer Girl.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, they're trying to drive another woman offline. And then I saw a photograph of Super Gamer Girl, and he looks like the Montana Bomber.
Okay. Big beard.
Big beard, huge beer gut, just like, the exact type of person who I thought was actually sending the abuse.
Yes. So what's happened to the left then? Because, I mean, I suppose you still call yourself left-wing. What has happened that they've...
I think Brexit and Trump, I think that those two kind of earthquakes...
Yes.
Kind of showed them how little power they had with the general public.
Okay.
They went a little bit mad. And I think they've retreated into their echo chambers where everyone agrees with them, and they've kind of done that thing of, well, I didn't like them anyway. I didn't like the general public anyway. And as a result, because of people like Owen Jones, they lost the North.
Yes.
They lost seats that have been safe for 30 years.
Once you start smearing 17.4 million people as racist because they didn't agree with you, there might be some races there, but there's not 17.4 million. There's a lot of resentment that comes out of that.
Absolutely. I'm beginning to realise that too. I was very much a kind of, I still think that, I still wish we were in Europe. But I remember that thing of whenever anyone came out as being pro-Brexit, I remembered really being disappointed and thinking, this is, and it was always a certain type of person. It was always people like Roger Daltrey, and it was kind of depressing. But at the same time now, I just think, again, I just don't know what's real and what's fake anymore because these people were lying so much.
But if we did live in a culture where everyone could disagree without resorting to demonisation, then those sort of misunderstandings wouldn't happen.
Yeah, it's tribalism, and it's getting worse because of the internet. It's people. It's like you said about the LGB Alliance, the hate group thing.
Yes.
Rather than thinking about an issue, it's allowing someone else to do the thinking and just copying their homework.
Yes.
And so when you see things like bad people on both sides, or you're on the wrong side of history, or trans women are women, or whatever, non-binary people are valid, whatever that means, then you know that you're talking to someone who has not really thought about these issues.
No, because those are just slogans.
Yeah.
They're not. That's
Exactly.
not thinking, is it?
It's hard to. It's actually easy to fight against these because they are just slogans, and you can just destroy their arguments. But the thing is, they don't get into a position where they will be challenged. Like, for instance, Owen Jones refuses to talk to women about this issue.
Yeah.
He says he will only talk to trans people about this issue, but he'll never talk to Debbie Hayton.
Yeah.
Because Debbie Hayton disagrees with him.
Yeah.
So it's cowardice. They know their belief system is built on nothing.
Well, debate would open it up. It would fall apart. That's the problem.
Can you imagine getting someone like Owen Jones into a studio and saying, "Can you tell me why you believe Eddie Izzard is the same sex as your mum?"
Yes.
He would actually be stuck because he couldn't do it without making an absolute fool of himself.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if he said anything other than, yes, Eddie Izzard is the same sex as my mum, he would be cancelled.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting.
They're in a bit of a bind, but Owen Jones is just hilarious because he just keeps digging, and he's one of the few remaining ones. There's a lot of people have begun to see what's happening, and they're actually staying very quiet about this issue.
Do you see an end to all this? I mean, I know you've sacrificed a lot for this principle, and I'm sure a lot of people have said you just leave it alone, right?
Yeah, that was a constant thing. Stop talking about it.
And I suppose is it just that it's not in your nature to shut up when you're told to shut up?
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like, and I don't like bullies. These people are bullies. The Marion Miller in Scotland is being put through a court trial for putting up ribbons. It's not even she may not get convicted, but the process is the punishment, and and that is happening again and again. Johnny Best, who I spoke to you about, who signed that letter asking for a less toxic thing. He went through a 3-year process because he had complaints about him for signing that letter and for interacting in a friendly way with me.
So you're that toxic now.
Yeah, but the thing about it is these people are being put through these things. The social worker who's been suspended, they're being put through these things because all these institutions are captured and they can do it quietly without anyone noticing.
Yeah.
So I always thought my role, which is a little bit curtailed now, I'm off Twitter, but it's still kind of okay because the Substack, while small in terms of its reach compared to Twitter, it seems to be, people seem to look to it as a source of news on this. But what I like to do is I like to say, hey, look at this person being bullied, right? This is the person bullying them, and this is why and this is what she's saying, and this is what this person is saying. I like pointing these people out to people because they don't like sunlight. They don't like being exposed.
No, and that's very important. And as you say, no one else is reporting on it.
Yeah.
And that's why people are going to your Substack.
It's exhausting. It's like, what?
But on a personal level, I mean, it's affected your marriage, hasn't it? Which is...
Well, no, it's kind of affected it fatally. The marriage is over. But, when you have the police come around and when people try and stop your TV shows and all that type of thing, which they did to her, because they couldn't get to me because I just wouldn't shut up.
Yeah.
So they decided to switch tactics and go for her.
But then when, with the loss of friends, with the loss of your marriage, do you ever think, I wish I hadn't have bothered?
No, not at all, because it's one of those weird things because, the crazy thing is, I know I'm right. I know I'm right on this. I have absolutely relaxed in my position because so many trans people agree with me, so many lesbians and gay people agree with me.
Yeah. I think the majority generally, but they're probably not going to say.
Well, exactly. No, it is extremely. All these policies are extremely unpopular, and it's the people who are fighting them who are getting hurt. So I wouldn't have been able to stand to one side once I noticed that happening, and also the whole thing about children being put on a medical pathway, that's really distressing to me. These kids are ruining their lives and they're being told a lie. Which, here's another example. This is, we were talking about the craziness of it, These young American girls who've grown up under this kind of atmosphere.
Yeah.
They're getting double mastectomies, identifying as boys, and they're going to gay bathhouses. And they're expecting to join in with the activities there.
Yeah. I think they underestimate what goes on in those.
Sorry, I may be using the wrong term, but they go to let's go hookup.
Yeah.
Hookup situations.
Yes.
And they're hurt. They're hurt. They're emotionally hurt because these gay men aren't interested.
Because if you believe,
because they don't believe they're a straight woman anymore.
Yeah. If you believe that homosexuality is just about identity, then you would be hurt by that.
Yeah.
And when you're confronted with the reality that it's about men attracted to physical men, then that's not good for you either, is it?
No, and then what are you left with? You're left with a body that's not your own, Like when you get a double mastectomy, all the sensation goes from here, It's so distressing what's happening, that I don't see how anyone could be quiet about it,
Yeah.
So no, I would do it all again because I'm doing it for my kids as well, I don't want them growing up in a world where my daughter is referred to as a cervix haver, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So
And then what about the impact on your career? I mean, we were talking earlier about Channel 4 removing one of the episodes of The It Crowd. Was it just the one episode they removed?
yeah. I mean, you know, that's just shameful capitulation because, you know, what can you say? Everything. This is the generation that grew up without playing outside.
Yeah.
And they are scared of everything,
Yeah.
and they're offended by everything. You know, and I think this kind of cultural, what would you call it, overprotectiveness. It's leaving kids very vulnerable.
Yes.
You know, to what life throws at them.
But why is there a particular thing about this issue in terms of kids? Because, you know, I had a complaint when I was teaching a stand-up course at a theatre because of a joke I'd told as to Tanya, and someone in the class said that made them feel unsafe to be in the room with me because of a joke I'd told through a character. I mean, that unsafe thing, I've had it the other day. A friend of mine who's a stand-up comic in Edinburgh has had complaints from the staff at the venue because of his material, saying they feel their identities are being devalued by the performer on stage. Now,
I think one thing that's happening is you might look at this as a coalition between a lot of people who should know better, a lot of organizations that have become corrupted, like Stonewall, and a very, very weird media that's just gone mad. But they're all in coalition with the most narcissistic person and demanding person in your friendship group.
Right, okay.
You know, that person is now telling everyone else, I'm non-binary, that means you have to do this, blah, blah, blah. And you know, if people are laughing at a comedian, he might just decide that that's a bit too much attention for the comedian and start saying that he's a bit frightened.
Well, since when does humour and why is this the thing that's now seen? Why is there so much humorlessness amongst these activists? That's the first thing. But also, why is humour seen as so dangerous and jokes are seen as so dangerous? Like your show would have to be removed. I mean, what do they fear? That it might corrupt people? What's that about?
I don't know. Channel 4. When Channel 4 wrote to me, they said people might think that Channel 4 don't believe trans women are women.
What, because of your?
Yeah, they might think
right?
Channel 4 believes this, you know, because some of the jokes were you know, the whole joke was about how this woman was still male socialized, so still liked all the things that her boyfriend liked, so it was perfect girlfriend for this guy. That was the joke, you know, so, you know, I guess that's what they meant. But the thing about it is, I wrote back to them and I said, I don't think trans women are women. Trans women are men with dysphoria, you know.
Yes.
It's calling them women is offensive to me, you know. You're appropriating, you know, the reality of being a woman.
And those phrases in of themselves, I mean, Helen Joyce cited someone, I can't remember who referred to these kind of things as a thought-terminating cliche.
Cliches, yeah.
Which is exactly right, because you say trans women are women. Well, no, trans women are individuals who are anatomically male people who identify as women. And there's nothing wrong with that if they want to do that. That's the full sentence, right?
But like, you know, if you look at, I mean, you can talk about a person who's fully transitioned, and you can, you know, have a conversation about that in terms of what women's barriers are. I'm afraid those barriers are going to go up even higher now, though, because they're so angry at the way they've been treated in this. But then you get someone like Eddie Izzard. Eddie Izzard isn't a woman. He's not a woman. And the idea, and also it's so insulting he does this thing of boy mode and girl mode.
Yeah, what does he mean by this boy mode and girl mode?
Girl mode means he puts on lippy and a pink beret. Boy mode means he's going to a Steven Spielberg audition and he wants to be taken seriously. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
It is the height of male privilege to think that you can just hop into the female experience and then hop back out and be in a TV show.
But that's the logical end point of identity politics, is that you can just pick and choose as though off a shelf.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And, you know, the other thing that happens a lot is, you know, you bring up Rachel Dolezal.
Yeah.
And you say, if that, you know, she appropriated the black experience, was completely mercilessly destroyed for it.
Yeah.
Why is that different to a man appropriating the female experience?
Yeah.
It just is.
So you think at the heart of it, there's a lot of just old-fashioned misogyny going on.
Oh, yeah. I think this is the oldest... I mean, it's the most bizarre incarnation of it, but it's the oldest battle in the world. You know, women had started to make, you know, had started to claim territory that was rightfully theirs by demanding certain things. And men thought, well, that's enough of that. And they started identifying as women.
If you fight how can you fight misogyny when misogyny is dressed up as a progressive thing? Just strategically, how can that be done, do you think?
I don't know, just by, again, you just got to keep fighting.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't want to sound like it is what it is, what I'm involved in. This is the fight I've chosen, and that's fine, I'm going to just deal with it. But we really need more people to speak up. When Simon Callow spoke up, when J.K. Rowling spoke up, it's just so wonderful. It allows the conversation to happen in a more natural way.
Yeah.
A few more people understand the issues. It opens it up a little bit.
But they've got to know that when they do, they're going to be mercilessly attacked.
Well, that's the thing. But if more people speak up, then those people won't be isolated and destroyed. Like Simon Callow, I know today, they'll immediately have found out if he's in anything. They'll be writing letters to the theatre.
Yeah.
They'll be scaring anyone. If he's got any advertising deals with anyone, they'll be writing to them. But if enough people speak up at the same time, it's going to be harder to target them.
Well, that's the hope, isn't it? But you know, it's easier said than done. It really is, because a lot of people. Because I do sympathise with people who are nervous and the extent of it. And in terms of just getting back to your career, do you think that you'll ever be able to just go back to how things were in your career? I know you've got the Father Ted musical, which is written and ready to go, but this must have some kind of impact, given that activists will try and target your livelihood as
Oh no, they already have. I've lost so much money. The only money I'm making now is through the Substack.
Right.
And I don't even bother pitching things because I know there's so many. One thing about TV executives is they're very into fashion.
Yeah.
So they'll all be. I'm sure they'll all be captured. So I'm just going to wait. It's like a storm. You just have to wait for it to end.
Yes.
But at the moment, anyway, I can't really write comedy because, as I say, when they're calling the Montana bomber a she in the Independent, how can you beat that?
Well, it's interesting. You used to write for Brass Eye.
Yes.
And that show would have had stuff that, it is difficult to satirise now because it
I mean, we were always amazed during Brass Eye how easy it was to get celebrities to say very silly things.
Yeah.
But now they don't even need Chris Morris there to help them out. They just do it naturally.
Yeah.
You see politicians unable to say what a woman is. Or claiming there's more than two sexes on television.
Yeah.
They're just...
Was it Dawn Butler who said
themselves.
that babies aren't born with a biological sex?
Yeah, I know. I think that was Dawn. What's her name? Dawn, the Labour.
Yeah, I thought it was Dawn Butler.
Oh, is that who you said? Sorry, I thought you. I had someone else in my head.
Yeah. But I think for a politician, a leading politician, quite a major figure, to say something that's a 5-year-old knows isn't true.
Yeah. And you can see it in their eyes that they're absolutely terrified when the subject comes up, because they've been told by their assistants, or whatever you call them, SPADs, is that the word?
Is it?
I don't know. But they've been told that this is the way to go. But if you actually engage them in the conversation about it, which you never can, they wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't be able to. It's the Scottish government is trying to bring in gender recognition. And it's just a complete disaster. It's already a disaster.
But it's also saying that children who identify, young children to the age of 4, who tell their teacher that they're actually a girl or actually a boy, that the parents shouldn't be told about this. So this is the other aspect that I wanted to ask you about, is because it's all very well saying, we need to stand up and make a fuss about it. More people need to be open and talk about it. But the strategy of taking children and saying gender ideology isn't just a religion, it's a thing that is true. Because the idea of a sexed soul is a sort of quasi-religious idea.
Yes.
And so to say to a child, no, it's actually true, it is the equivalent of just having a religious education for a child.
And I think it's abuse. I think it's abuse to tell kids things like that.
But if now has it gone too far that now actually too many schools are taking this on board now, and it's
it's a real problem. But there's good signs as well. I've had 2 school governors ring me to ask me advice on how to resist Stonewall. And so there's lots of people who are fighting it. A lot of people are being quite strong in terms of they're not really encouraging the girls who are coming out as trans, and that's having a good result as well. People tend to drop it after a while, But it's a terrible thing to say to kids. Like the Welsh government now officially says in their glossary of trans terms that some people may look like men, but they're really women on the inside.
Yeah.
That's an appalling thing to say to children. you know. And again, it rips through safeguarding. You know, the idea of telling a 4-year-old kid that you can have secrets from your parents.
Oh, I mean, that's...
Like, if Savile came back, he would be in heaven at this type of stuff, you know?
So do you think that so much of this is reduced to left-wing people are on this side and right-wing people are on this side? But, I mean, I've certainly come to the conclusion that left and right are sort of unhelpful designations in these culture war, whatever you want to call it, kind of debates. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the real problem is misinformation on the right and the left.
Yeah.
You know, the left, we used to complain about the lack of scientific literacy when it came to global warming and the sheer amount of lies and obfuscation and oh, it's not so bad, and if it is bad then we can stop it and all this sort of stuff, you know. And we used to be rightfully outraged at that, you know. But now that the left are doing it with gender identity, this unscientific, harmful thing that's going to create a huge mental health crisis in future years, how can we complain about the right doing it?
Yeah.
So the problem, I'm really looking forward to, you know, like for instance, there is now a kind of woman's pledge in all the parties, the Greens, the Conservatives, Labour. There's a very non-partisan attitude to defending women's rights.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm hoping that might be the basis for a movement, for a political movement, you know, because one like that would have to be, we'd have to be open to all the things that we've said we want, like discussion and stuff like this, and so, you know, you might get a nicer kind of politics, and there's individuals now. I used to hate every person who was right way. I'm so embarrassed about it because I just thought I thought you know they're global warming deniers and they're.
But it's reduced to good versus evil.
It was. I was definitely guilty of that. But one of the other brilliant things about this fight is that it's put me in contact with Baroness Nicholson, who is just a hero, an absolute heroine, you know. She's literally saved kids' lives herself, you know. In Iraq, she did this, you know. You know, she's an incredibly brilliant woman. She writes letters written in the most impeccable formal style that people can't ignore. She's brilliant. So I'm meeting people from all walks of life. Harry Miller, who's a kind of, he's like the cop in Life on Mars. You know, he's a proper old school, you know, more right-leaning policeman than left-leaning. But I hugely value his friendship and the fellowship I've kind of I've had with some of these people.
I mean, I share that experience because a while ago, most of my friends were left-wing, all of them were left-wing, and I tended to demonise and think, well, right-wing, that means evil, that means bad, rather than just... And, you know, having mocked identity politics and having so many left-wing people turn against me, and then having become friends with right-wing people, and I realised it's a different way of looking at the world. That's what it is. It's not malevolent.
Yes.
It's not, you know...
And also I see in people like Harry and, you know, people who may have kind of, who may, you know, have had experiences that lead them to a conservative frame of mind. But you can see them sometimes troubled by trying to work out that stuff, trying to look at their own problems and blind spots they might have, and I admire anyone who does that. You know,
well, we should all be open to that, shouldn't we? To be able to, you know, not assume that we've got all the answers. Maybe we're always going to be wrong about something, aren't we? I mean, you know. I
mean, it's great. You know, the only good thing about losing my Twitter account was that it completely wiped out all my behaviour before the gender fight.
That's quite good. It's a service, right?
Yeah, it's great. You know,
but also Twitter is a cesspit.
Twitter is a cesspit. But even when, you know, like because of this fight, I've looked back at times when I thought I was doing good, and I've started to think, was I really doing good? I think one thing that this whole thing should teach us is that we have not yet evolved as a species into people who can really deal with having the internet.
Yeah.
And someone said a brilliant thing. They said the internet is making us into a species that will be unable to create an internet.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
see that.
Yeah. So we're becoming so kind of used to, again.
Well, we don't know, do we? We don't know what the ramifications of all this are. We probably won't know for decades.
Did you hear? I saw something today that there's a new viral thing that's spreading amongst teenagers where they're developing Tourette's because there's a very popular YouTuber with Tourette's.
I haven't seen. So again, this social contagion idea.
Yeah. So if that something like that can happen, maybe there can be things like thought viruses and so on. Which I think the gender debate is really, because again, those thought terminating cliches, they're kind of like a virus, that's spreading through our language.
And my limited knowledge of the way that we think, and there's the idea that we do actually like the easier train of thought. We do like not to have things explained for us rather than have to think about it, and certainly don't like challenging our most cherished opinions, and it's probably good for us all to do that every now and then.
Well, as I say, it's just been brilliant to break out of the media bubble I was in and meet people whose experiences are at the raw end of things, like social workers and people who work in rape crisis centres. You don't kind of experience all that without coming away very, very aware of what they go through. It'll be harder to make jokes about any of this stuff because I now know so many people personally who I wouldn't have known if it wasn't for this fight. But yeah.
So there are positives as well as negatives for
definitely.
this entire thing.
For a writer, it's almost invaluable.
Yeah.
Because as I say, I only knew people in the media, and now, I know policemen like Harry. I know social workers who are being fired because of me. I know just a huge range of people, and that's very valuable in the long run for a writer.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is the start of a bigger conversation, and maybe more people will be prepared to talk to you about this stuff.
We'll see. We'll see.
Well, I have to thank you for coming on. I want you just to remind us of where people can read your.
Oh yes, the Substack. I have a Substack called the Glinner Update. If you Google that, it'll come up. And if you take out a paid subscription, you'll be financing probably the only website that covers this whole area.
Graham Linehan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It was lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. And thanks for joining us on the Free Speech Nation podcast. I'll see you next week.